Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. And today I just wanted to talk a bit about the books that I've been reading this week. I've been trying to squeeze in some reading alongside my prize reading. So here's what's kind of happened in the midst of all of that as well. But let's get talking about them. And there've been three fantastic books. First up, we have A New Me by Helen Oyeyemi. And this, in typical fashion from her other books, from what I can tell, is a wild book that at times doesn't almost feel like it makes sense, but it kind of makes sense in its own universe. So in the book, we follow a character, or rather characters, sort of, called Kinga, and they are different characters who all do a different thing on a different day. So essentially they are all taking over the body of Kinga at different moments, and they've all got other names, but all kind of attachment names that basically spell out A to G to be the letters that kind of take us through the week. So for example, Kinga A has Mondays, Kinga B has Tuesdays, and so on. And they each have their own sort of personalities and quirks. So for example, one of them, the one that sort of takes the weekend, is very much all about sleeping and resting and uses Sunday as a day of rest, but then occasionally will use that as a day to go and pray. And then when they do, Kinga A on Monday suddenly realizes that they've got less energy because instead of sleeping a lot, Kinga G would have been there in church and not just sleeping. And so it becomes this weird book that kind of is about this, but also there are these odd little moments that keep popping up. So this idea of being kidnapped and having sort of a sack put over your head, but then also the sack is filled with teeth. There's a lot that is very weird and surreal about this book. And in many ways, the trippy cover does justice to that. It's a very strange book. But I was so utterly charmed by it at the same time. There's something about the way the book talks about this idea of who we might get to be, and how the moments of, you know, Monday me might affect Wednesday me, that I thought was actually quite a fun thought experiment as well, because there are subtle ways that plays out in other day-to-day life, right? That we overextend ourselves one day and the next day we don't have that energy, and all these other things. But anyway, that all aside, the book then becomes this other conversation about the Czech Republic, where I think Helen Oyeyemi lives, and particularly then these various other things happening in and around the city and around the country. And it's just so surreal at times, but also there's a real fun playfulness about this book that I think the kind of the wildness of the idea belies, because it's so fun and silly, and it feels like she's having a great time writing it, as well as it also being a book that is looking at other things as well. Next up, we have Mir by Danielle Giles, and this is a book that is set in the 900s in the UK, particularly around Norfolk. And as a result, the book is written in this style of very much being about that time, this very almost simplified language at times, but a language that is very much infused with religion and religious language, you know, lots of things around curses and blessings and sins and all of these sorts of things. And what we really do is we follow a set of sisters, of sort of religious sisters, holy sisters, as they go about various things that are happening. And without spoiling it, this is a book where there's a very strong sense of people have done wrong and have sinned and will be punished, and therefore characters live on this weird knife edge of everything around them seeming to confirm that they have, yes, indeed done something wrong that has angered the Lord, and that there will be a repercussion for them. And so as a result, this book becomes this really strange form of penance, where we watch characters wrangle with the idea that they themselves have done a horrid wrong and will be forever tainted, won't make it through to heaven, all of those sorts of things. But yeah, I found the characters of this book really interesting, because they are just caught in this very different way, and so in some ways so many parts of them feel so relatable to who we are, this sense of guilt or joy or whatever, but there's such a different circumstance around them that feels like it's quite hard to understand them. And the rest of the book also has this sort of folkloric element to it, where it feels like we're watching a mythological story playing out in real life, but also not. There's a lot that's going on in this book, and I found it really quite captivating and a really daring way of telling a story, because this is not something that anyone in the current moment would be able to relate to linguistically, right? This is not how any of us currently reading the book would speak, and we don't even have the same reference points as we might do with sort of books that are set in the 1800s or 1900s or even the Tudor times. There's something so much further back about this novel that just feels really interesting, I think. And last but very much not least, Ordinary Saints by Niamh Mhaoileoin. And this book I just thought was so gorgeous in so many ways. I think this is a really brilliant piece of writing. The core idea is we have a young woman who finds out that her brother Ferdia is potentially due to be made a saint. He's a man who died in his early to mid-20s in a freak accident, but he had been training to really enter into religious life in a much bigger way. He'd already been sort of taking on sort of priest-like roles, and he was training. He went to Rome to do all this training, and we have this image of him as an incredibly virtuous man who was trying to do good in the world. And his sister, who we hear the book through, is somebody whose life feels somewhat different. She is struggling with the idea that that her life feels very different. She is called Jacinta, but goes by Jay throughout the book, and that's also a kind of thing where there feels like she's almost changed her name and presence in front of everybody else. But she is dealing with this really complex set of emotions where she's deeply missing her brother and feels sad about it. She hates the idea of organized religion around her, particularly herself as a lesbian, and feels that religion has often turned its back on her and people like her. But also, she doesn't like the idea that by going through the sainthood process, which I have to admit I didn't realise was as much still a thing, and the book actually comments on that quite a few times about how people don't think it's a thing. But in order for him to be perhaps beatified and become a saint, there needs to be some kind of exhumation of his life, both practically of perhaps having to deal with his physical body and taking that out of the ground at some point, but also of digging back up his history. We are left with so many questions about who he is, and his sister has to wrangle with the fact that instead of being able to process his death and sort of leave that be, they are now having to go back over old stories of who he was. And so what then comes up is, stories of them as kids where she realizes that he was being an incredibly loving and kind person, but also other things where she questions things. So he had a very close male friend who she later finds out is gay. Does that mean potentially her brother might have been? And if so, is that a thing that she says because that's important to his history? Or is it a thing that she keeps hidden because she doesn't want to impact his chances of becoming a saint? And it leads to these conversations with her parents where she essentially wants to try and argue that he has always been the favourite child, that she has been ignored because of him, because he has always taken up all the oxygen in the room, because he's the successful one, he's the religious one, he's the one who hasn't come out as being gay. All of these things that make him the favourite son and the favourite child, to her detriment as she feels it. And so I think this book is particularly expert and brilliant at finding those little moments of difficulty between a parent and child, of the various ways that one thing that happened 20 years ago can still sting now, can still feel so horrible in the current moment, even though that in many other ways has been buried. And equally, she realizes how much she's potentially been a terrible daughter to them. And so it throws up all of this other stuff. And I love novels that do this, where one small thing comes in and blows up everything, and everybody has to put it back together. And I think this book just does it so beautifully, particularly this idea of what does it mean to memorialize somebody, because that becomes a fixed story. And so if we remember him as a saint, then suddenly everybody has stories of, oh, well, he helped me and he did this thing for me and all these other things. And how true are those things, and can they ever really be a full measure of a person? I think this is a gorgeous, gorgeous book, and so beautifully done. So that's been me talking about the books I've been reading this week. I hope you are having a lovely week, and are not melting if you're in the UK. Take care and speak to you all very, very soon. Bye bye. Have a great week.